Chapter 29, Filling in the Blanks. The next few days were spent with my parents filling me in on what had happened in the 16 days between the shooting and our reunion. What I learned was this. As soon as the bus driver, Usman by John, realized what had happened, he drove me straight to SWAT Central Hospital. The other girls were screaming and crying. I was lying on Moniba's lap, bleeding. My father was at a meeting of the Association of Private Schools and had just gone on stage to give a speech. When he finished and learned what had happened, he rushed off to the hospital. He found me inside, lying on a stretcher, a bandage over my head. My eyes closed, my hair spread out. My daughter, you are my brave daughter, my beautiful daughter. He said to me over and over as if saying it could awaken me. I think somehow I did know he was there, even though I was not conscious. The doctors told him that the bullet had not gone near my brain and that the injury wasn't serious. Soon the Army took charge, and by 3 p.m., I was in an ambulance on the way to a helicopter that would take me to another hospital in Peshawar. There was no time to wait for my mother, so Madame Mariam, who had arrived at the hospital soon after my father, insisted on coming in case I needed a woman's help. My mother had initially been told I was shot in the foot. Then she was told I was shot in the brain. Neighbors had flocked to our house in tears when they heard the news. Don't cry, my mother had said. Pray. As the helicopter flew over our street, she rushed up to the roof, and as she watched it fly by, knowing I was inside, my mother took her scarf off her head, a rare gesture for a Pashtun woman, and lifted it up to the sky, holding it in both hands as if it were an offering. God, I entrust her to you, she said. Poor Atal had found out about the shooting when he turned on the TV after school, and he realized that if he hadn't had a tantrum about riding on the tailboard, he would have been on that bus too. Within hours after the shooting, Pakistani TV channels ran footage of me with prayers and poems, and this was happening. As this was happening, I was arriving at the Combined Military Hospital in Peshawar, where a neurosurgeon named Colonel Junaid examined me and discovered something surprising. The bullet was still inside me. He soon discovered that what the doctors in SWAT told my father was incorrect. The bullet had, in fact, gone very close to my brain. He informed my parents that my brain was swelling and that he would need to remove part of my skull to give it space to expand. We need to operate now to give her a chance, he said. His superiors were being told I should be sent abroad immediately, but Colonel Junaid stuck with his decision, and it was a decision that saved my life. My mother prayed throughout the 5-hour operation as soon as she began. She felt a calm come over her. From then on, she knew that I would be all right. But 2 days after I was shot, my condition was getting worse. My father was so convinced I would die that he started thinking about my funeral. He tried not to think about the past and whether he had been wrong to encourage me to speak out and campaign. 2 British doctors happened to be in nearby Rawalpindi, and the Army brought them in to consult. They were Dr. Fiona and Dr. Javed, and they were the next to save my life. Dr. Fiona and Dr. Javed said that if I stayed in Peshawar, I would suffer brain damage or I would die. The quality of the care concerned them. They thought I was at risk for infection. Even though she was due to fly back to Birmingham, Dr. Fiona stayed on and arranged to have me airlifted to another Army hospital, this one in Rawalpindi. Security was tight at this new hospital because of the possibility of another Taliban attack. My family was kept in a military hostel near the hospital and had little access to news from the outside world, since the hostel had no internet connection. They did not yet realize that my story had traveled all around the world and that people were calling for me to be sent abroad for treatment. It was only when I kindly cook from the hostel brought them some newspapers that my parents found out that the whole world knew about my shooting. My parents were rarely consulted on what should happen to me when my condition became grave. There was no time. All decisions were made by the Army. Dr. Fiona insisted that I be treated overseas for the best care. Eventually, it was decided that I would go to Dr. Javed's own hospital in Birmingham, Queen Elizabeth Hospital, but I needed to be moved within 48 hours, 72 at the most. My mother and brothers had no passports or documentation, though, so the Army told my father he would have to travel alone with me. He was in an impossible situation. If he left the country with me, he would be leaving his wife and sons in Rawalpindi, possibly at risk of attack. So he made a choice. What has happened to my daughter has happened, he told Dr. Javid. Now she is in God's hands. I must stay with the rest of my family. Dr. Javid reassured him that I would be taken care of. Isn't it a miracle you all happened to be here when Malala was shot, my father said. It is my belief God sends the solution first and the problems later, replied Dr. Javid. My father then signed a document making Dr. Fiona my legal guardian for the trip to the UK. He was in tears as he handed over my passport. Although I don't remember it, my parents said goodbye to me at 11 p.m. on the 14th of October. It was the last time they saw me in Pakistan, and they wouldn't see me again for 11 days. My father did not want me to wake up in a strange country without my family there. He was worried about how confused I would be, how abandoned I might feel, but he assumed their passports and visas were being processed and they would join me in a matter of days. He had no idea that a government official delayed their departure to join me because he wanted to fly with them. The wait felt endless. It was during the earliest days in Peshawar, amid the horror and grief, that my father asked my mother, "Is this my fault?" "No, Kasta," she replied. "You didn't send Malala out thieving or killing or committing crimes. It was a noble cause. You should not blame yourself. But the ones who should feel shame are the Taliban for shooting a child and the government for not protecting her." By that time, the Taliban issued a statement saying they shot me because my campaign was an obscenity. They said they had used 2 local Swati men who had collected information about me and my route to school and had deliberately carried out the attack near an army checkpoint to show they could strike anywhere. Their trademark was to kill by shots to the head. Shazia and Kanat, the other 2 girls who'd been shot that day, were also recovering. Kanat's arm had been grazed by a bullet, and Shazia had been hit in the palm and left collarbone. 2 bullets, 3 wounds. I had missed so much, and yet as my parents told me everything that had transpired while I was in a coma or in my windowless hospital room, it was almost as if they were telling me a story about someone else. It felt as if these things had happened to some other girl, not me. Perhaps it's because I do not remember a thing about the shooting, not one single thing. The doctors and nurses offered complicated explanations for why I didn't recall the attack. They said the brain protects us from memories that are too painful to remember. Or they said my brain might have shut down as soon as I was injured. I love science and I love nothing more than asking question upon question to figure out the way things work, but I don't need science to figure out why I don't remember the attack. I know why. God is kind to me. People don't understand when I say this. I suppose unless you have been close to death, you cannot understand. But death and I have been very close, and death, it seems, did not want me. Apparently, many people have tried to visit me, journalists, celebrities, and a number of politicians, but the hospital had kept them away so I could heal in private. One day, an important minister from Pakistan came and met with my father. He said the government had turned the country upside down to find the man who shot me. My father held his tongue, but he knew this was empty talk. They had never even found the person who had killed Benazir Bhutto. Only one person was in jail after the shooting, our poor dear bus driver. The army said they were holding him so they could identify the gunman. But why had they arrested our bus driver and not the gunman? It was madness. The minister also asked my father if I could give a smile to the nation. He did not know this was the one thing I could not do. My father was unhappy, but again, he held his tongue. My father, who had dared to talk back to the Taliban, was learning that sometimes saying nothing speaks just as loudly. When I finally watched the news, I learned that a spokesman for Fazlullah said the Taliban had been forced to shoot me because I would not stop speaking out against them. They had warned me, they told the press, but I wouldn't stop. My other crimes? I spoke for education and peace. In their terms, I was speaking for Western education, which was against Islam, in their opinion. The Taliban would try again to kill me, Fazlullah said. Let this be a lesson. It was a lesson indeed. My mother was right when she quoted from the Holy Quran. Falsehood has to die, she had told me all those years ago when I was considering doing the blog for the BBC, and truth has to come forward. Truth will always triumph over falsehood. This is the true Islamic belief that has guided us on our journey. The Taliban has shot me to try to silence me. Instead, the whole world was listening to my message now.